As a child, he used to study Dragon's Den. He used to pause the TV and then decide whether or not he was going to invest his imaginary money. And then being after kicked out of school, seemingly far from the road to success, Stephen Bartlett pursued his dreams, not only building a company worth £300 million, but also becoming the youngest dragon in the history of the show. Please welcome Stephen Bartlett. Welcome. Lovely to see you. Before we talk about Dragon's Den, did you hear us talking about men's lingerie?
I knew you were going to ask me. I've actually got some on if you... Interesting. I'm all for, you know, expression and what people want to do in the bedroom. I think it just depends on what you're into. If it's your cup of tea, then I'm open to it. But it's probably not my cup of tea.
Well, it says, you know, 60% rise in searches for men's lingerie, so, you know, it might be a good business
that kind
deal.
Of lingerie.
Someone came into Dragon's Den.
I don't know. I need to see the numbers, but probably not. Probably.
You do a lot of number crunching. You've been doing a lot of number crunching from a very young age. I mentioned there that you used to watch Dragon's Den and imagine that you had a pot of money and then pause the television to the side.
I watched it from 12 years old in Plymouth, and I used to pause the TV and pretend I was the sixth dragon. And I actually applied to pitch on Dragon's Den when I was 18. I never heard back, but someone found it in my diary, which was uploaded online from when I was 18 years old. And I was announced as a dragon 10 years to the week after I'd applied. Oh, wow. So it feels it's a really, really crazy experience. And I don't know if you believe in manifestation at all, but I'd actually sent a message to all of my team and said, you know what, I think I want to do Dragon's Den. And then 60 days after, I got the email from the BBC inviting me to have the meeting.
So do you believe in that kind of positive, if you think it enough and believe it enough, it could happen?
Yeah, well, so here's a kind of controversial take. I've never really gone... There's a book called The Secret, which kind of has taught us a culture of this manifestation and things will appear in your life. But the way that I kind of rationalise it is, think of it like a car, right? Of course, it's important to wake up in the morning and set the sat-nav when you're in your garage, but you also have to drive. And setting the... Oh, you go nowhere. If you just set the sat-nav, you will sit in the garage, right? So for me, I'm very clear and intentional about the direction I want to go in, but then the more important part, or equally important part, to knowing your direction is having the drive to turn the key and put your foot down. So I believe in the balance of both, and I think I've kind of lived my life by that principle.
And how is the... I'm quite intrigued by your childhood, because you talk about your parents weren't around that much because they were working, because money was very tight. So, you know, like a lot of people, they got up very early and you had to get yourself to school and back again and whatever.
Yeah.
But you said it created a gulf of independence. And I'm intrigued by that, because I do think a modern scourge sometimes is that parents tend to do too much for their children and they take away that learning ability of how to do things for themselves. Would you agree with that?
Totally. And quite honestly, you know, I was talking to my hairdresser this morning about parenting, and we often think that the way to raise a really sort of impressive or successful child is, you know, there's this handbook of perfection that you just have to follow, this instruction manual. But actually, the reason why I'm sat here today, I am 100% sure is because of things that you would consider parental failures.
Yeah.
It's because my parents weren't around. It's because I didn't have all the nice gifts and presents. There wasn't Christmas presents, you know, as I got older. There wasn't birthday presents. So what that meant was, on one hand, because my parents were so busy working, and my mum is the hardest working person I've ever met, she would sleep in her office on the floor, in her shop on the floor, wake up, run the shop, then go back to sleep on the floor in the back room on a bag of rice in Plymouth. Because they weren't around, I learnt this very important lesson that if I am to have anything, it doesn't appear on the kitchen counter or under a tree. It's of my own doing. And then the other part of that is when you're the only black kid in a pretty much all-white school in Plymouth and you don't have the nice things, you get a little bit insecure. I'm already trying to fit in. I'm already trying to figure out why my hair is different from everyone else's and my skin is different. I'm desperate to fit in, which makes me insecure, and I have this gulf of independence. So I went off after it on my own. And I was an incredibly independent kid from 14, 15, starting companies. 18, I start another one. And yeah.
So because of that background, do you think you're kind of born with an entrepreneurial skill, or did you acquire it because of your upbringing?
I think it's most... I mean, you can be predisposed to certain characteristics in your personality, but if you just look at... I'm the youngest of 4 kids. The other 3 went to university and did very, very well in academia. I always failed. I was kicked out of school eventually, dropped out of university after 1 lecture. And the only thing that I can point at and say was slightly different from my upbringing, we have fundamentally really the same genetics, is my parents got really broke and things got really, really hard around the time when I was about 10.
Right.
So I really felt it, and I really felt that independence. And I think I was way more insecure than my brothers and sisters, and I had way more independence. I mean, I could leave the house for days, and I don't think anyone would really notice at about 10 or 12 years old. And that was the defining thing. So they talk about nature and nurture. I think the nurture part for me was what ultimately made me how I am. And I see it in my podcast guests. I sit there with the most talented people in the world, athletes, Olympians, Eddie Hearn, you name it. And in fact, the thing that tends to be the root cause of their success is insecurity. It's their parents making a mistake or not being there or putting too much pressure on them, which makes them an anomaly. An anomalous childhood.
But as a parent, that can then make you feel guilty.
Honestly, if I was a parent, just like relax. Do your best and be at peace with that. Because, I mean, you guys will know, it's a rolling the dice. You don't know what you're going to get. And if...
As you say, there's no such thing as perfection anyway.
Yeah.
And I follow you on TikTok, and one of the things I remember you saying about, which really struck me, was about, you know, a kid in Africa being ecstatic because they get rice. And you've met billionaires who are, you know, never happy because they've never got enough. And it is that kind of balance, isn't it?
That's what I've come to learn that happiness is. Unhappiness is when your expectations of how life is supposed to be going go unmet. So if your expectations are low... I was born in Africa, like the people in the village that I was born in Africa. If your expectation is rice, you know, you'll be euphoric when that expectation is met. If you become a billionaire and you're travelling first class in private jets and you go to a 7 Michelin star restaurant and one thing is wrong, because of your expectation, you will be unhappy. And it's quite... So that tells you a cure and a symptom and a formula for how to live a happier life, which is to have more realistic expectations for your life, for your relationships and for everything in between.
You mentioned your podcast there, The Diary of a CEO podcast. It's going on tour now.
Yes.
So February the 21st till 28th of March.
Yep.
Travelling around the country. What are you hoping people will take home from that?
Yeah, so it's a musical, motivational, spoken word. There's violence.
Musical? Are you singing?
I'm not. Maybe I'll join in a little bit. But you know, when people talk about live podcasts, it's typically someone sat on a stage talking. And for me, and this kind of is a thesis for my entire life, I just wanted to incorporate everything that I am. And I'm not a label. I'm not a podcast host, a CEO. I love music. I love theatre. So it's all of that wrapped into one. There's a big house gospel choir with me. And it's all of those sort of passions woven into this show, which will hopefully liberate you from a lot of the toxic nonsense that we live sort of imprisoned by. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think... Sadly, I think it might be sold out. Yeah. So everyone's listening thinking, I'll go and see that. But check. I'm sure they'll be adding more dates if it's so successful. But it's absolutely fascinating listening to you. We wish we had more time, Stephen, but sadly we don't. Thank you very much, Stephen Bartlett, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.